Good afternoon. So today, I have a few questions for the room that I'd like for you to contemplate, consider, just think about. And meanwhile, I want to think aloud with yourselves and share just some of the things that I've been working through, that I've been thinking about over the past number of years. Now, for a number of years, I've had the privilege in my academic journey to speak to a number of black women teachers from across the UK. I've had the privilege of exploring what has been their lived experience, how they have been portrayed, perceived, presented across the educational landscape, the extent to which they are visible or invisible. And what I've unearthed, what I've found in my exploration is a commonality in all their stories, in that all the black women teachers that I have spoken to have shown an equal enthusiasm, zeal, ambition, passion, drive to advance and to excel in the profession. And they've embodied this through hard work and labour. They have poured their heart and souls into their work to the extent that some may call it free labour. Now, what else has been common in my findings is that oftentimes these women are being bypassed where it comes to opportunities for advancement, progression. They found that no matter how hard they worked, there just seems to be this pattern of not moving forward, no mobility, no progression. It's almost as if there's this invisible, intangible, incomprehensible glass ceiling that just sits there with this signpost here that says that's about far enough. And my question is, why? Why are black women teachers not progressing, not making their way up the leadership rungs? Nowhere to be seen and nowhere to be heard. But my question to you, my first question to you is, does visibility matter? Simple question, does visibility matter? Does it matter that black women teachers are not seen? Does it matter whether black, African, Caribbean, does it matter whether global majority teachers are seen in all levels of the teaching profession? Now, I must confess, this is something I'm still working through. I'm trying to find my why. But I'd just like you to think about that. What I'm finding is that the answer as to whether it matters is not the question, but why it matters. Now, what I'm finding is the intersecting barriers, the challenges that these women are facing, that they're so complex that the response, the why, is not so simple. Why are they not working their way up? Why are they not making it to positions of headship, senior leadership? Now, let's ponder on the concept of visibility. What is visibility? Now, I'm not speaking about the simple capacity to see or to be seen physically, but rather in this particular context, I'm referring to the degree to which particular social, racialized groups are acknowledged, recognized, fairly or unfairly represented at every stratum of an institution or an organizational structure. That said, let's crystallize that concept of visibility a little with some statistics. Across the breadth of the UK, as of the academic year 2021 to 22, our teacher workforce, broken down by ethnicity, looked a little something like this. A staggering 85% of teachers were found to identify as white British, whereas some of the ethnic minority groups only held or occupied fractions of the teacher workforce. Now, when we ascend the leadership rungs, we find that the racialized imbalance becomes even more stark. But my question is, does it matter? Does it matter who is seen at the top? Does it matter who is seen in our classrooms? yes, we're talking about visibility, but I do want us to be guided in acknowledging and being aware of the fact that there is a spectrum of visibility. We have hypo-visibility, and that's what we're seeing with our black teachers, this lack of adequate representation, a voice barely heard, a presence scarcely felt. Then we have hypervisibility, which is this overrepresentation of a particular group or characteristic amplified to the point of distortion. So to further my questioning and to further your contemplation, my question then becomes, does it matter who is seen, who is represented? What message does a white majority-led structure send when it stands before a student body that is a vibrant medley of multicultural Britain? What does it mean for our society when a group is so hyper-visible, so overwhelmingly present, while another is but a shadow of representation? These aren't just rhetorical questions. These are questions that do demand answers, a response, action, should there be any implications to what we're seeing. In my estimation, yes, visibility does matter, fundamentally, intrinsically, unequivocally. It does matter. Now, as you are trying to find your response to whether or not you think it matters, I would like to take you back in time to a moment in history, my personal experience of working my way through school, primary, secondary, education. Because as much as I've studied and explored the lived experiences of this collective of black women teachers from across the UK, I do find that my personal experience does inform and shape the extent to which I might respond to this question of the why. Now, I've stood at both sides of the classroom, both as student and as teacher. Now, I found that in my student experience, I've come across so many educators of all different sizes, shapes, personalities, backgrounds. However, I never once had a black teacher. Never in 30 years. The only black teacher presence I remember is in secondary school. We had a supply teacher who was known less for her pedagogy, but her 4-foot-something height and her blonde box braids that were the same size as her. That's about it. And stepping into the role of teacher, when the tables turned, I found that the narrative remained unchanged. There weren't any black teachers. There was no such thing as black teachers. I never had black colleagues, let alone colleagues of colour. A black face in a sea of white faces. But here's where we cut to the heart of the matter and explore this double-edged sword element. As I reflect on my experience, I find that there was something of a visibility paradox. I've spoken about this hypervisibility, hypovisibility, but let me explain. So in my teaching experience, I was the diversity. I brought the diversity to my school in that there was no one else that looked like me, shared my complexion or background. I represented the black and brown students in the school. In my experience, it was quite an isolating, marginalising, quite a fatiguing experience to be the only in my school community, in every school that I taught. But the question then became, does visibility matter? Does it matter that I'm the only black teacher in the school? I say yeah, because as a consequence of being the only, as a consequence of being so hypo-visible, in many ways I was hyper-visible. Why? Because as the black teacher, all eyes were on me. Every move was scrutinised, analysed, the way I walked, the way I talked, the way I did my hair. Miss, why are you doing your hair like that? Ooh, miss, why'd you say it like that? It was peculiar. There was a curiosity among my students. More so my colleagues. Some thought that I was the living, moving, breathing solution, the panacea for racism in our school. We've got a black teacher now. We've solved it. And before I knew it, I became the unwitting poster child for diversity in my school. I'd wake up in the morning and find that I'm literally on the billboards. We've got a black teacher. We're inclusive now. Now, sparing you the details, I was hyper-aware of this delicate dance between this spectrum of visibility, and ultimately I did find it incredibly fatiguing, difficult, because beyond fulfilling the demands of my own actual job, there was all this going on here. In the midst of this visibility dance, my goal was just to do well in my profession. I had every intention to step in to the profession, ascend all the way to senior leadership. I wanted to be the first black head teacher, black woman head teacher in my locality. I wanted to get to the top of the food chain. Why? Because I wanted the students to see someone like me. Why? Because you cannot be what you cannot see. My ambition was fueled by this passion, this desire to break the mold, to shatter the glass class ceiling, to show these students that they could be whatever they wanted to be against all odds. But like this collective of women that I studied over the last couple of years, I find that it was quite a tiring, fatiguing endeavour. Because no matter how hard I hustled, it just seemed that there were no opportunities, there was no trajectory, there was no mobility, there was no movement in the context that I found myself in, no matter how hard I hustled for it. It was as though there was this invisible, incomprehensible, this intangible glass class ceiling here that sat there with a signpost that said, that's just about far enough. And so reflecting on my own experience, I asked myself some real soul-searching questions. Cheds, does it really matter? Is it really essential for the students to see someone like me? Does it have any impact on the quality of education at all? Is this tireless labour really and truly worth it? My answer remained yes, a resounding yes. However, over time, my line of questioning evolved to a question of cost. Visibility, yes, but at what expense? Being seen, yes, but at what cost? So I weighed up the emotional, physical, economic cost of trying to do something about this visibility thing, and eventually the cost-benefit analysis challenged my earlier career aspirations. To the extent that I have a dream became, I had a dream. Why? Because it seemed, it felt, it appeared that the cost was so high, so very high in my particular context, being the black face in a white space. There were so many extraneous variables to contend with, to navigate, to juggle, that the young and inexperienced me wasn't so equipped, wasn't so prepared to bear the brunt of the cost of my aspiration. Being the black teacher within the school structure was incredibly isolating, marginalising, and fatiguing. However, not giving up on the mission, not giving up on that vision, I instead resolved to change direction. I decided to change the game from the outside of the school structure, outside of the box in which I felt somewhat disempowered, and I felt it was time to find the tools, the methods, the means to pursue a path outside of the classroom with every intent to respond to this very question of, does visibility matter? If so, why? I hope you're thinking about your response to this. Does it matter? And yes, my experience was isolating, marginalising, fatiguing, and may I add, in many ways, discouraging. But I must carry out my reflection and say that, do you know what? This fatigue that I keep speaking about is not necessarily unique to the black woman, because the teaching profession is hard work. Teachers across the UK are collectively fatigued. That's not unique to the black woman. However, I would like to draw your attention to that additional layer of struggle. This dual spectre of hyper-visibility and hypo-visibility that black women teachers, black teachers, global majority teachers are constantly having to navigate in their teaching experiences. Now, this is no oppression Olympics per se, to say that, we have the highest degree of suffering. See me, look at me, pity me. It's not what I'm getting at. I'm wanting to draw your attention to the intersections of struggle. There we go. For a number of years, I have studied, explored the lived experiences of black women teachers from across the UK. I've had the privilege of exploring the extent to which they are perceived, portrayed, presented across the profession. The extent to which they are both visible and invisibles, and the consequences of. And one truth has emerged from my study, that visibility does matter. The presence and absence of racially and ethnic diverse staff affects all of us, both staff and students alike, somehow, some way. For every face seen, every voice heard enriches our lived experience. It enriches our human endeavour. Every voice that echoes through our hallways, through the classroom, the dining rooms, every story that unfolds in those classrooms lies an opportunity to learn, to grow, to move closer to the world that we dream of. It's in the multitude of these stories shared that we find the truest reflection of who we are and who we have the potential to become. Thank you.